last few performances have gotten a bit nervous because of the stuff that I'm talking about. And it's interesting that you brought up safety and space, because that's definitely a lot of what's brought me here. I've been living up in Prince George for 12 years, and northern BC is very different from, especially the Kootenays. Like, there's a lot of great things about northern BC, but the opioid crisis is a real problem in Prince George. I'm sure it's a problem all over northern BC, but in Prince George in particular, that's where my experiences were. And violence is a really big problem, particularly against women. I have some poems I'll read that are about that, but I've also been using my time as a performer lately to speak about some experiences, because I think it's really important to do so. For my real job, I'm an education assistant, and I work with lots of young women, and of course in my position I work with a lot of vulnerable young women. And in Prince George last August, I was living up there, and I went to go for a walk at 5:30 in the morning because I used to have dogs, and one of them was a little crazy, and coming from the Kootenays, space is a thing, and silence and stuff like that. So I used to walk my dogs at 5:30 in the morning because there was a lot more space and silence for my one crazy dog, and then it was something that I really enjoyed and felt like I needed as a part of my day. So after they passed, I tried to continue walking early in the morning, and one morning I got chased into a park by 2, maybe 4 men in an SUV. The back windows were tinted, so I don't know exactly how many men were in the SUV, but they chased me into a park and tried to kidnap me. And unfortunately, that wasn't the worst part of the whole experience. The police officer that showed up was pretty, I think I said flippant in my report, but really he was kind of rude. He made some assumptions based on how I was dressed, even though I was covered head to toe. And at one point he told me to just go home and sleep it off. And I was never given a file number, which is not customary if you're a victim. And I had to ask him for his name 3 times. And yeah, so I've been fighting against the RCMP for a while, and I'll talk more about that. But Canada's an interesting country to live in. We have a pretty good reputation, but I'm not sure that we've earned it. I think the poem that, I don't have it here, but the poem I have online talks about how racism is a real problem in Canada. And I think as much as we've come pretty far, I think misogyny can be a real problem in Canada too. It's only legal to be topless as a woman if you're in BC or Ontario. And my friend Kenny Sandhar found this out. She's a really neat performer, and you should check her out if you can. She comes up with all these kinisms. And, it's just crazy what she uses. But she was in Edmonton in her yard, and she was topless, and the neighbors called the cops, and the cops came over and asked her to put her shirt on. And so Kenny's a really neat person. The next day on her Facebook, I saw that it said, I'm having a topless pool party. I don't care how you identify, just come over and take your shirt off. And so that was happening around the time of my incident too. So I wrote this poem for kind of both of us. And this is called For Kenny Sandhar and So Many Other Beautiful Brave Women. In the words of Jessica Rabbit, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. I think that even my father could see how my outer beauty would be the bane of my existence. Unlike most men, he wrapped it around all of the other things that made me beautiful and cherished them all together. But the world taught me to cover up, to hide behind fake wedding rings or baggy sweatshirts that made a poor shield against the arrows of ogling eyes and the words that cut into my soul and made me question the worth of myself. I want to love my long legs. I want to enjoy the curve of my calf as much as any man does. I want to bare my breasts whenever and wherever I am comfortable sharing them. I want to know that no means no, and that I know how to fit into my own skin the way I want to, way before I learn how to fit into the arms of a man. But the hand of patriarchy keeps trying to push women down, to grind us into the dirt, and sometimes make us disappear altogether. They didn't see as they were pushing us into the soil that we women were seeds, and by the goddess, we would all bloom beautifully, with or without the help of our fellow man. So I tried to complain to the police the next morning, and that was a very confusing process. They didn't even really make it clear who I was talking to. And I was supposed to get a face-to-face reconciliation meeting with the officer in question, but instead he phoned me at 10 p.m. on the day of the incident and gave me what he said was an apology, but it felt more like he was trying to cover his butt. And And after that, I got a phone call about 2 weeks later from the officer I complained to, and he said that they both felt like the officer in question had learned something and they tried to dismiss my complaint. But I'm kind of an activist as well. I've done a lot of environmental work. I went to the Watch House in Burnaby and volunteered as an overnight firekeeper, and that was one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had. But through a lot of that, I don't know, I've learned a few things, and so we had a press release, and one of my friends put out an article in the newspaper, and then all of a sudden the cops were interested in talking to me about my experience. Since my incident, at least 5 more Indigenous women have gone missing in the North, and that's why I say that racism is a real problem, because even though the violence problems, like I'm white, I'm very white, even though the violence problems in Prince George affect more than just Indigenous women, unfortunately, because the way our country and our government is structured, Indigenous women do tend to be more vulnerable in that population, and they do tend to suffer more in the violence area because of that. So 5 more women went missing since my incident, and I didn't see the cops looking for them very much. And it took about 1.5 years for me to get a decision out of them that I'm not very happy with, that I'll talk about a little bit more. But also up north, there's a place called the Unistoten Camp and the Gidimt'en Checkpoint. And that's made up of Wet'suwet'en people that have been living on their territory in a sustainable fashion. Like Frida Huson has built a healing center where she brings in Indigenous youth that are struggling with addiction, and they get to stay at the healing center, and they use trap lines and they have solar panels. And so as well as being a really great place for Indigenous people to relearn their culture and help heal their traumas, I think it's also a great example to the rest of us about how we can be doing better. And even though the cops didn't put a lot of effort into looking for any of those women, there was a 200-man SWAT team put together, and the Prince George RCMP were part of that, and they were sent to the Gidimt'en Checkpoint to take out 14 peaceful protesters. And that made me pretty angry. I don't know if a lot of people down here don't know that red dresses in the trees is a symbol for living missing Indigenous women. And there's a red dress campaign that happens every year in Prince George, and that's a pretty big deal. Unfortunately, a lot of white people don't tend to go to those celebrations in Prince George or rallies where there's awareness happening. But they also started hanging red dresses out of Wet'suwet'en territory, and the RCMP were actually ripping red dresses out of the trees on the Wet'suwet'en territory, which I think is going a little bit too far. So Rita Wong also has been an activist that I know, and she's helped me with some stuff in my case. And she was arrested this year at the Watch House, and she was given a 28-day sentence, which is one of the longest sentences given to a protester yet in the recent protests that we've had. So me and some of my friends put together an anthology, and this poem is in that anthology, and it's called They Will Keep Speaking the Night, and you can actually buy it here in Nelson at the Trading Co. at the stand where Mike Wisnidity sells art, and lots of other people do too. He's super cool too. Or at Otter Books. So this poem is called Beyond Bread and Roses, and it kind of talks about all the stuff that I've been talking about just now. In the year of reconciliation, the genocide continues. More informally, of course, but it continues just the same. A quick scroll through Facebook will give you the names of at least a dozen missing Indigenous women on any given day. The fact that you can now read about them is progress, proof that Kukuka Canada can't keep all of its dirty little secrets, no matter how much money SNC Lavalin funnels towards the Trudeau government. But one more missing is one too many. Screams from a white woman trying to save herself from assailants while out on a morning walk are also a call left unanswered by the friendly neighborhood RCMP. They are too busy sending SWAT teams to the Unistoten camp on behalf of corporate interests that apparently supersede the needs of actual citizens. Too busy making up false reports so that they can steal vehicles from people who strive to protect their own homelands and secure a future for us all. The cop didn't even have to see the trailer I lived in to decide that I was trash, who was probably asking for it, or maybe even making the whole thing up. So what chance do my Indigenous sisters have if they choose to seek protection? And why should they bother to look to a system designed to exterminate them and anyone else who doesn't look like us? Even though us and them is nothing more than a capitalist construct designed to keep us divided and down in the face of a tyranny that must not be allowed to reign. Thousands of sad-faced like buttons won't get the job done, but it's hard to get boots on the ground when 14 peaceful protesters can be declared to be terrorists that warrant a 200-man army-style response. So we take action when and wherever we can. Memorials to the murdered are tolerated in town, but on Wet'suwet'en territory, the empty red dresses swinging in the trees make the redcoats angry and nervous. A reminder to them that the women who wore them will never be forgotten, that the tide of resistance will rise each time they push us to the ground, because it is long past time to stand up. It is long past time to put aside petty differences and claim the rights that so many of our ancestors fought for. Turtle Island is shaking its back in an effort to jolt us out of our complacency, but as usual, the colonizers have charted us a course down the path to disaster. This time it has to go beyond a battle for bread and roses. We must take back more than the night, ensure that immigrant children never again live in cages, and that when cage doors do open, there is a world for us all to go back to. So about 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, I got a letter from the RCMP finally after meeting with them over and over for a year and a half, and they've decided that overall the officer's conduct was professional and that the only thing he did wrong was not offer the victim services support. So they don't know that I've also filed with the Federal Human Rights Commission and I've reopened that case, and I'm hoping that it'll make some changes, because ultimately I think this is all a symptom of capitalism and just the idea that we should all conform to be a certain way and do things a certain way, and greed is kind of running everything. And